And Jasmine Eyre is working, and they have an article in my paper this month on specific recommendations. So we know what to do. All we have to do now is to bring our communities together. And I'd like to talk about that at some later point. I don't want to say.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head though, Ray, and that's these community activists who are being heard. And I want to just encourage them. It's why myself, Congresswoman Beatty, and President Hardin went to the protests in the first place to support the protesters and encourage the protesters. Dontavius, you kind of represent this younger crowd, the millennial crowd. Yeah. What's your perspective? Is this the right time?
Yeah.
You're going to be in the legislature soon, presumably.
So do I to the young people crowd.
No, Charles, you don't. You're not in the young people crowd. You with me, brother. All right, you with me.
False claims.
So we're gonna cover. I know, right? False claims.
Okay, I'm
people
sorry.
Are watching you, sir. They're watching you. So we're gonna go to Dontavius. I'll shift to you, Charles, and Ball at you home on this question. Dontavius.
Yeah. So, and I'll be brief. I think we are at a point where all the systems are firing off at the same time. I think we have having our young leaders on the ground fighting and pushing for policy to begin to shift as it relates to police tactics and the system as a whole. I think that is what many of the protesters are talking about. We need to change the entire system. It's been rooted in racism. It's rooted in so many policies that unfortunately hold a huge swath of people, a group of people back, right? And so right now, what I'm seeing, I see policymakers that are working day in and day out to try and figure out from a policy angle what can be done. I see the protesters on the ground. I see individuals who are donating to Black businesses. I'm seeing everything happening the way I believe it needs to happen. One of the things that I would say though is that it's important for us to come together. The coalitions, everyone is going to have a role in this fight, and it's important that we all understand everyone's role and how we can work together to really move the system. This is a systemic change that we're fighting for right now, and it's going to require everyone. And so if we don't get this done, I feel like there's going to be a lot of other consequences in the future if we don't use this moment right to actually change what is inherently wrong with our system. And so I think everything's moving the way it needs to. My hope is that we can come together in that coalition and actually deal with this and address it once and for all.
Sure. And with the listening audience, I want y'all to know Dontavius is the one person on this call that will be more than likely a legislator. He'll be writing laws. And so if you got ideas, you got perspectives and thoughts, look him up on Instagram or Facebook. And I'm sure he wants to hear what you have to say. Charles?
And as Dontavius said, we must not let this moment pass in history without addressing racial injustice. Marching is good. It's not enough. Another diversity and inclusion committee is not enough. All races must come together to engage in this hard work to address the centuries of injustice that we are. And I just want to say, and most of you echoed this, this is certainly the best opportunity we've ever had. Mayor said, in our lifetimes, we will never have this much opportunity to seize a moment. I think it's time for our city and our nation, and we must forge forward. And fortunately, these young people have coalesced in a way to talk about real change because they don't even understand, as Senator mentioned and the mayor mentioned, that we've tried this, we thought we did, right? And here we stand. But I just want to think it's something very, very important that I personally feel is that, so we didn't cause racism. We don't support racism. So it's really unfair to think that we're supposed to fix racism. We must rely on white people who cause racism to fix this and we certainly are experts and we certainly have to provide advice, but we must rely on, depend on, and expect and hold white people responsible for addressing this issue. And part of that is our policing department. It doesn't work for us. It doesn't support us. It doesn't protect us. I don't know about any of you. I've never felt safe. Other than Mayor Coleman's son, who's a police officer, I wouldn't feel safe. I'm not safe if a policeman pulls me over. I live in Bexley. Y'all know that. Every time I drive down the street, I'm a nervous wreck if I see a policeman come up behind me thinking, okay, let me get ready. Anything in my car, who said what, and that's just the life that we live. And so these young folk don't know that to the degree that we do. And so we must rely on them and support these folk to make sure that they have all the resources that we have available to move this agenda forward.
Man, tell us how you really
can I just add on to that?
Yeah, please. And then we'll bring it home with Bo after you.
Okay, so I absolutely believe that it's our young folks that are going to make the difference in this more than any other time. They have the ideas, the energy, the passion, and they need to be substantially at the table to engage in this process. Otherwise, it won't work. They have to be at the table in a big way. We have to listen to them and converse with them and get them in leadership roles like Dontavius right now, who is on his way to great things in this city. But there's other opportunities all around. The second thing is, and I talked about how I see now being the time, there's great motivation through multiple sectors of this community. I was glad to see, 700, 1,500, whatever number of business leaders sign this letter calling that racism was a health hazard. Right. Primary, and that was a good thing. But I want to make sure that those same people who signed that letter actually look in the mirror for their own business, to look at their own diversity ranks, their own executive suites, their own boards, what vendors they use in their own companies, and begin to address racism internally as well as beyond just signing a letter saying it's a bad thing.
Man, I'm so glad you brought that up, and I know we want to hear from Bo on this, but I'm glad you brought that up because it was Franklin County that sort of launched this sort of conversation that racism is a public health crisis. And what people, I think, fail to see, because I've probably got no less than 100 calls from around the country, from commissioners to mayors, to city council people saying, can I get a copy of your resolution? And my response is always the same. I want to send you our Rise Together Blueprint to Reduce Poverty and Racism report, because that's what we're really talking about. And when we did the work that goes with understanding how these areas are being impacted in wealth and education, healthcare, and you name it, that at the heart of every one of these areas was race. And so I try to get them to understand that. And it's easy to do the resolution in that part, but it's harder to actually do the work and put your money where your mouth is and put your values on the table. Bo, don't you bring us home on this question? And then I'm gonna shake it up and get a little controversial with y'all, because this is a controversial group altogether. So it wouldn't be a good call if I didn't shake it up a little bit. And don't be giving me these, measured answers. I want the real answer on this next question. Go ahead, Bo.
All right. Well, let me, before we go to the controversy, let me say this. I'm from Springfield, Ohio, a small town, and maybe my experience is much different than many, but I didn't initially grow up fearing the police. I remember when I was in the first grade, Officer Herman Carr came and taught my class about a program called Safety City, taught us about traffic and being safe. We got to drive around in these little cars with the little foot pedals. And so I grew up believing that the police is my friend. They were peace officers. And so that's how I grew up. And then we had the police athletic league. The police officers were our coaches on the basketball team. And so there was a connection, there was community. And so at some point though, maybe in the 80s, and we could talk about when it changed and what happened with 9/11 and the abundance of weapons proliferation and how the police tactics shifted to more militarized versions of policing. And we saw that the police weren't living necessarily in our communities. And so it created a dichotomy that I think the time has come for us to have peace officers who are part of the fabric of the community, who are trained to de-escalate situations and not provoke violence and mass incarceration. So, I mean, we could talk about historically where the shift went, but it's time to shift back. And so that's where I'm at with that.
And remember, it's interesting you say that, because that's I've not heard any person say that perspective, that, you know, you grew up in a time where police were, you know, you weren't afraid. I grew up, you and I are about the same age. You're probably a little older than me, if I remember correctly.
No, actually, I think you got me by 3 months.
Oh, okay. Whatever you say, but whatever you say. But you grew up in Springfield. That's the first part, you know, that maybe there's something there. And, but, you know, there was never a time for me growing up that we didn't feel this way about the police. And I tell you, whenever we play PAL, the Police Athletic League, we always work to kick their butt just for that reason. I mean, we you know, it was 5 touchdowns or it didn't count. So let me just shift it up a little bit and get a little more controversial. Maybe not controversial, but I want y'all to be real about this. Do you think that there's a difference between the way we see this conversation of police for Black men and Black women?
Mm-hmm.
Don't everybody go at once.
Not in my household.
No.
My wife is
No.
as strong as I am on this issue, and all social justice issues. You know, that's why we've been married 48 years. We exchange this kind of information on a daily basis. No, but beyond my wife, I think the sisters are just as hurt and focused on change as we are. I think it's a real opportunity for us to come together, not only within our families and African-American men and women, but the white community as well. So it's an opportunity in that regard. But I don't think that the sisters are any less fired up than we are about this.
Okay, and I want everybody to answer this question because I want to get more questions in, because I'm starting to get questions coming in from our viewing audience. But anybody else want to answer that one?
I will agree that I think everyone's fired up about this, and I can't distinguish it between male and female. That I think the Black women and Black men are shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm on this question, because what applies to one applies to the other.
Yeah, what I think I asked the question wrong. I think what I was really trying to ask was, do you think that the police treat Black women the same way, or is it more so Black men? I agree. I think Black women get and are on board and supportive. But do you think there's a difference between Black men and Black women in terms of policing and this interaction?
So if oh, sorry.
No. Well, I was just going to say they're mothers, and it's their young men who are being affected. And I think that they're probably equally as impassioned as we are. And the reality of it is, I mean, your mother is the one who's having to talk, be careful, be careful, be careful with you. It's typically not your father. It's your mother who's the one who's worrying what the police gonna do to you. And so I think women are probably more concerned than we are, because you know, they are the mothers of our communities. And so they have a whole different level of concern and care that most men don't have, because they need to protect their children, right? And these are their boys who are out there. You heard the man, he crying for his mother as he's being killed. He didn't cry for his father. And so women take that responsibility. Yeah. I think women take that responsibility very heavily. They have been the ones in a lot of our communities that are protecting us to begin with. And I think that they stand in fear, probably even more than we do.
I don't think I think we all in agreement. But I think the question I'm asking is, do you think when a white police officer when you are driving down the street, do you think it's the same for a Black man as it is for a Black woman? And if you're in a nice car in a neighborhood, maybe ain't that many Black people in, do you think they stop Black women as much as they do Black men? And do you think they treat them the same way? Or is it's still bad, it's just a different way?
Well, I no, they don't treat them as harshly as you treat African-American men. We're a threat. right? Yeah, African American men become the threat. It's like, who's the alpha male going to be? Particularly if there's, you get pulled over and there's a confrontation essentially that occurs immediately with a lot of us. I don't back down to anybody. I don't care who you are, how many badges, how many guns you got. I'm just not that kind of guy. And so it comes through. It comes through in the tone of your voice, within the resonance within your voice, within your attitude, your look, your how docile you may be, and so we're different. I think that's what Charles is saying. There's a female behavior, there's a male kind of a behavior. There's the mothering instincts that he talked about, and I'm so glad that you raised that. But no, I don't think that women get treated exactly the same way that men do. When there might be some violation of any kind.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, I was down at the protest, and I agree with what Senator Miller is saying, except for when I was down at the protest, you could see they had a lot of disregard, no matter who you were. And when I was with Congresswoman Beatty, I was next to her when she got sprayed in the face, and that officer could care less if she was Congresswoman Beatty or whoever. And it was more than disappointing to see such a disrespectful approach. Let me shift it up and change the question, because I want to get a bunch of different questions in. We just got 20 minutes left. And so how many of you guys, by just a voice vote here, how many of you went down to the march on Sunday with black men in suits? Did any of you guys go? So Dontavius,
I
you
went.
were there?
Yeah.
Anybody else go? Mayor Coleman, you didn't go? No?
I did not go.
I went. I was there, and I got a couple of social media messages about people complaining about black males being in suits, and that it was an unnecessary show. And these are black people, by the way, and they felt that because I knew them, I knew the people, and they felt that it was what does that show? What does that do? What's your general reaction to the whole black men in suits thing? Do you think that's a positive imagery that needs to be displayed, or you kind of feel on the other side that that's a divide and conquer kind of thing, of because we wear suits, and because I don't wear a suit to work every day, I'm this or I'm that. And so, I mean, do you think that's a real issue, or because I probably got 4 or 5 different social media sort of hits of people saying they didn't like that we were down there in suits, and and I like I said, I knew all the people, so I knew they were African American. So what do you all think of that?
I think that it doesn't matter if you come in suits or T-shirts or shorts. The fact that black men are getting together, that's what matters. And that's the real thing. As long as folks are getting together, talking, and trying to be effective and doing something, to me, it doesn't matter if you wear a tie or you wear flip-flops. Whether you got braids or your hair is cut close. The brotherhood extends beyond what you wear.
Do you think it was a message, though, of the image that the media often displays of black men is one way or a certain way? And do you think that this was an effort to sort of illustrate that, a different image of black men in general? Ray, what's your thoughts on that?
So I took a totally different approach. I'm from the Black church, and we was raised when you want to make an impression, you put your suit on and you make one. And I think that it was a display of respect. I think it was a wonderful thing. And I think anything shy of black men coming together looking nice is a wonderful thing. We can't ever say anything bad about that in my mind. We're raised to present ourselves in the best fashion. But certainly I agree with Mayor. I mean, however you show up is how you show up. But if you're willing and able and have capacity and you know how to do that, I think that you're doing that is standing for Black excellence is a wonderful thing. And I think if young people who don't necessarily agree with the suits at all times and, comporting to what they may perceive the corporate world look. I think that young men coming out and displaying their best of their wares on a Sunday afternoon in the middle of a pandemic is to be commended.
All right, I want to hear from everybody on this. Ray, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I guess I don't feel really strongly about it. I agree with the mayor, and I agree with Charles, even though it sounds like they may be saying something different. I've worn suits all of my life almost. I enjoy now not wearing suits that often. I put on a suit 2 days out of the week, and I just have so many experiences with it. For me, it's almost the quality. I mean, it's a conversation that's so different. It's the quality of the suit. You know what I mean? I mean, if you wear a suit like that jacket that Charles has on right now, I'm gonna compliment you on it, right?
Right.
But but if you got on, I'm always sharp, right? Because I roll like that. See?
That's how you live it.
Right. We know.
All right, we see.
Well, okay, Bo, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my thoughts are this. One, some of this is generational. Some of this is just differences in personal style, but I would be curious to know why that was an issue for people to have Black men show up in suits. To me, we want to build a broad coalition, and we got to realize that in this agenda, we each have a different assignment. We're positioned differently, we stand differently on certain issues, but on this, we all agree. So let's not get caught up in the divisive tactics of divide and conquer and imagery. The fact that we are there protesting, showing that support for the young people who I think are really leading this movement, but then having an older generation dressed in suits saying, yeah, we agree and we're with you. To me, that's the focus.
Yeah, and let me just quickly give a shout out to Judge Laurel Beatty, who joined us. Thank you so much. Retired Officer Patty Ware Hobson tuned in. Thank you for being with us. Also, Ernie Sullivan and Keena Smith, and I said Judge Laurel Beatty. Blunt, thank you so much for joining us. Dontavius, on this issue of suits.
Yeah,
so you had on,
I was there with you.
Dontavius was looking fly, y'all. He had on a bow tie, and he had on this fly, summer suit, and he had a matching mask and everything on, so he went all out.
And it was hot. Look, I'll tell you this. I think, I've tuned into these conversations on Facebook as well. And I think one of if it was a critique, it was this idea around affirmation of Black men. And I do want to take this moment to say it does it too. And I think Mayor Coleman said this as well. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter if you wore jeans to a march. It doesn't matter if you wore a suit. I'm all about the affirmation of Black people. And as long as that is the singular theme and purpose of why we are coming together, that is the driver for me. And so I did wear a suit, but I didn't come because I wanted to wear a suit and look good in front of people. I came because in my
that was only part of it. You was trying to look good, right?
Right. I mean, look, you still got to step up, but really for me, the driving force is that I want us to come together collectively. And if that symbol, how long has it been since we've seen over 1,000 or somewhere over 1,000 people, 1,000 men come together for the city of Columbus on something, right? That's where I keep my mindset on, right? It's like, wow, like we came together and we're not fighting. We're all moving in the same direction, trying to move our city forward. And so that's where I keep my mind on. But I do want to affirm that there were people who felt, there may have been exclusive language or exclusionary language, but I'm here to tell you that, I didn't care what people were wearing. My hope is I want all of us to come together for the betterment of this city.
Well, I mean, I think you all hit the nail on the head there. And I want the listening audience to know I'm going to be doing a series of these talks. So we've got one coming up perhaps next week, I think it is, and then the week after. And I will bring this conversation home now on wealth and money. As you all know, we are in a census year. Every 10 years, we, by our Constitution, are required to do a census. And Ohio receives at least $34 billion in funding directly tied to the census. And considering we've lived in a COVID-19 2020, we're going to need even more of those resources going forward. And so the federal government has extended the date to turn in your census response form. And by the way, that $34 billion amounts to about $1,200 per person. And it goes to everything from the roadways you drive on to subsidizing childcare and healthcare for those who need it. But I want to hear, let's maybe start with the agency of impact, because you all deal with population. And when you are most vulnerable in our population, many times you are the resource that they turn to. And then I'm going to go to Charles because he's in the same position. And then we'll bring it home with, I'd love to hear the small business perspective from Ray Miller. And so, Bo, why don't you start us off? How important is this to the work you do?
It's critically important. I remember being in the barbershop and a couple brothers saying that they just didn't understand how the decisions being made in Washington really impact them locally. And I had the chance to tell them about the census. Because when we provide that information about our population and what's happening here locally, particularly as we're calculating the number of people living in poverty, that's what gets calculated in terms of the formula, in terms of how we all get funded. So state funding and a lot of local funding that even comes to organizations like mine is based upon the census count. So I had to tell brothers, I said, if you want to have programs like what we have for working with reentry populations and workforce development, small businesses, helping people build small businesses, then you need to make sure that we're counted. Everyone needs to be counted because that's how we're funded.
And much of those dollars flow through the county and then back out to these agencies. So Charles, talk about a little bit from your perspective in housing, what the census means. And before you do that, let me give a special shout out to Congresswoman Beatty. I know Larry Seward from her office is watching on her behalf. She's a busy woman, but she's very supportive. I know she was going to try to make an appearance, but had some other things come up. I know my friend Charles Hill joined us, and Kay Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. Charles?
Yeah, so as Bo indicated, an accurate count ensures that our state and our community receive its fair share of resources to address the basic needs, and housing being one of those. So for example, if renters are undercounted, the housing needs in our geography won't be accurately represented, and CMHA won't receive its allocation of resources based on its real reality. Our housing crisis has grown tremendously between COVID, and so everyone must be counted. And I think it's important to note, Black lives matter and they deserve to be counted. And that's who I'm talking about right now, guys. Back when this thing started, unless you were free African, you weren't even considered for the census. And it does include us. And we must stand up. We must be counted so that we can ensure that the necessary resources that Bo and his organization provide are funded, resources that we provide are funded, and certainly you at the county level. And so I can't stress it enough. We have done an incredible push within our residents to make sure that they understand that, people are under the impression they're going to take things if they're counted, right? No, this will help justify and clarify what our real needs are in our communities. And so I implore you all to participate in this effort.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Ray, is there a small business impact? And we got about 7 minutes before we shut down. So I'm going to ask, I got one more question. We're going to try to bring it home on. But Ray, is there a way that small businesses are affected from census counts too?
Yeah, there is. But let me just say this. I think this is probably the best place for me to say it since I didn't do it on the front end. I want to commend you as sincerely as I possibly can, Kevin, for not only this program, but the work that you've been doing on the census and the work that you've been doing as a county commissioner. I think that we have the best county commission that we have ever had in Franklin County right now.
I agree.
You and Mary, this sister who's on the county commission as well as Steve Brady. I think you guys have done an award-winning job with respect to poverty and racism and just overall leadership on these critical issues and funding those things that we've been talking about for years. So I just wanted to make sure that I said that, since I'm not good at doing that kind of thing, as you might know. I worked for the census when I was a student in college, and I had one of the toughest supervisors that one could find. Her name was Miss Mary Robinson, and she was just totally sold on the census. So she had me to understand the importance of it, even way back then when I was 20 years old. It's very similar to being a registered voter. In a sense, conceptually, it's very similar because we're always begging people to register and vote. You can't do all this talking about what ought to be if we're going to make the changes that we started off in this conversation talking about with law enforcement, and we're going to make legal changes or legislative changes in the Congress and the City Council and the state legislature. It's all about registered voters and who we're going to keep in office and who we're going to try to put out of office. And the same thing with the census. I had so many people to say to me, no, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm going door to door with the census, right? I'm not going to tell you how many people live here. I'm not going to tell you how many bathrooms we have. If you want to know, you go ask old man Schottenstein, they would say, right? And so if the example that Charles just gave, if we're going to make some improvement, if we're going to have greater resources for affordable housing, then we have to have an accurate count, right? With respect to businesses, you see what's going on right now with the coronavirus and questions around of resources being made available to small businesses. And then as African-American owned businesses, we're even in a different category than what's called a small business. So all of these things that can bring greater resources into our community, we have to be supportive of. It doesn't make any sense for us not to.
So we got 4 minutes to wrap up, and I got a question that came in, and I'm sorry I didn't get to you, Mayor Coleman, because I really wanted to hear your census answer, but I know what it's ultimately going to say. For those who, and that's how important the census is. If you haven't filled out your census form, you can fill it out at 2020census.gov. That's 2020census.gov. So many people call me and ask me, what can I do to help? What can I do to help right now in COVID-19? That's what you can do right now. You can make sure that your census form is filled out. You can encourage your family and friends to fill out that census form, and you can make sure that we are counted. The number you can call is 844-330-2020. That's 844-330-2020. One of the things that no one mentioned about the census too is that our census numbers also determine our congressional representation, the number of people we have. And right now we are fighting with states like Georgia and North Carolina, and we could possibly lose a congressional seat. And so our count is going to be critical now more than ever. We got 3 minutes, gentlemen, and I'm going to start with you, Mayor Coleman. And so many people asked, and this was one of the questions that came in from online, what can they do to help? In maybe one sentence, what can someone who's listening, what can they do to help right now in this environment?
After the protests die down, engage, participate, fill out your census form, vote, don't give up, and don't say no. Keep moving forward, and fight racism every time its head raises up. Support Kevin Boyce, because Kevin Boyce done a great job. As Ray has said, I totally agree with that. Commissioner Boyce, I want to thank you for all your role in all this. You've been a catalyst in so many ways. So I'm grateful, and I'm speaking for thousands of people in Franklin County.
I appreciate that. We're going to rip through this. We got 2 minutes. Dontavius, what can people do to help right now? One thing.
Everything that Mayor Coleman just said, on top of supporting Black-owned businesses. I think that is something that we just need to do, and make sure we're investing in our communities.
That's perfect. Bo, what do you think? Give us one thing.
Yep. One thing, you can volunteer with Impact Community Action. We will be engaged in robust civic engagement and education, or volunteer or join the NAACP.
Perfect. Ray, what one thing that people can do to help right now?
Register and vote, or just stop talking altogether.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Charles, it's the last words on you, man. What can people do to help out?
Vote, vote, vote.
Yeah, and I just want to take a minute to thank all of you fine, intelligent, hardworking men for joining me today. I'm going to be here at the same time next Wednesday with a whole different panel. Maybe one of these guys will come back again, but I really think that our time is now, and all of the things that you've been asked, participate in the census, vote, volunteer, all of those things are difference makers and matter. They matter. And so with that, I want to thank all of you out there in Central Ohio land for joining us. I'm so grateful for my panelists. You all have a great and safe week. God bless you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.